It is 2022, and marketers out there are talking about podcasts becoming mainstream now. So, not just marketers, but big names like Gary Vee are also suggesting of either starting a TikTok channel or becoming a podcaster because podcasters create the intimate connection between you and your audience. In this video, we'll be talking about whether or not you should start a podcast for your business. So, I am not going to give a cookie cutter answer whether yes, you should start a podcast for your business or no, you should not start a podcast for your business. But we'll walk through some things which you can maybe think over and decide whether or not podcasting is for you. So stay tuned and I'll see you in the next. Now, podcasting is more than just recording interviews with guests or having conversations with your business partners and more. So podcasting is a blend of networking with people, marketing your podcast episodes, connecting with your audience, and so much more. So before you decide to get your business podcast, you must consider whether you have the time to put in all the efforts required to make your podcast something that people would enjoy listening to. Because let's be honest, you don't want to start a podcast that's going to fade out soon. Podcasting will require time, and if you are willing to put in all the time and energy it needs, then your podcast will surely be a success. And it's more of being consistent with your episodes. It's, you could see it something as watering the plants. If major of the podcasts that get launched don't cross the 6 to 7 episode mark, and that's what is be popularly called as pod fade, and you don't want your podcast to be one among those. So before you start your podcast, you must be committed to sticking with seeing what your podcast has to what numbers a podcast is showing up for at least 3 consecutive months. This is what bare minimum I suggest. And not just launching your podcast but also being consistent with the podcast is really very crucial. You could see consistency something like watering the plants. If you do not water your plants regularly, your plants might just die. It's the same with your podcast. If you do not release episodes week on week, or whatever schedule you pick for your show, your audience might just end up getting confused. Like, they would keep wondering where your podcast has gone and where were you all this while. So being mindful of your time commitments and constraints is a smart way to deciding whether or not you should start a podcast. The other reason why you must consider starting your own podcast is because podcast can serve as an alternate marketing channel. We have millions of blogs on internet, and readers just skim through blogs nowadays. You don't even give a full read to the entire, do justice to the writer's efforts, you could say that way. There are thousands of YouTube videos which get uploaded to the platform every minute. So podcast is a relatively unsaturated market, and just getting a podcast launched right now might be a good head start to acing on this marketing channel. Also, you could look at podcasting if you want to find out an alternative to video form of content. So podcast in that way serves a good purpose. But just to add a little note there, if you'd consider starting a podcast, I'd highly recommend you start a YouTube channel as well, where you'd consistently upload your podcast episodes. That way you have all round efforts. The other reason why I'd suggest you consider starting a podcast is if you want to build concrete relationships with your guest or the industry experts that you'd be bringing as guests on your show, the audiences or your customers. Podcasts allow you to build concrete relationships with your guest as well as your audience. You are able to connect with high net worth people in your industry and form meaningful relationships with them by podcasting. So, podcasting not just allows you to connect with the leaders in your space, but also allow you to nurture your audience. There are these statistics that show that the amount of time your reader could spend on a blog is way lesser than they'd spend watching a video, and it is way lesser than a person who's tuning into podcasts. So with podcasts, your audience are hooked on more to your content, more to your voice, and this is why your audience will connect with you more and therefore help you gel up with your audience more. Another thing is there's this Edison research that has clearly mentioned that, podcast listeners end up buying products which were recommended by podcasters whom they tune into regularly. So this way you have a good chance of getting in front of your audience and establishing the connect that other marketing channels or paid ads would not have had. The other reason why you could want to start your podcast is if you want to create a pool of content which is rich with information and value loaded. So, podcast serves as a long form content, and you can easily snip out little pieces or chunks of bite sized information that could help your uh, target audience or ideal customers, and spread it in your newsletters or blogs or your social media, and connect with them in a more intimate manner without running out of ideas. So podcast will allow you to create more content in less amount of time. Some of the podcast hosts also go on to become authors, and they write books from the content that is put out on their podcast. So podcasting is a smart way of you know getting out more content in less amount of time. By putting out content week on week and bringing out topics that might interest your audience is a good way to communicate your brand values, your mission, and most importantly, let the audience know of your products and services. This way, you're not just spreading awareness about your brand, but also establishing your brand authority. But if you are somebody who is now thinking, but Manali, I have a very small niche audience, and how do I bring forward my podcast to them? Will it be worth my effort and energy? Now, if you're wondering that your niche might not just fit good for podcast, then you might want to rethink or reconsider, because I'd like to give you an example for this. So, I had recently tuned into a podcast which was by wedding planners, and what they were talking mostly about is how do get they get the decorations from, how they do budgeting, what kind of food is preferred during the season, and topics ranging in that arena. So if you are someone like a photographer, maybe you could walk through walk through the process of how to create good backdrops, or which is the right direction to shoot during what day of time or something of that sort. So you could engage your audience or your listeners into by leveraging storytelling and bringing on guests or your clients with whom you could share your experiences and put it out in the form of case studies as well. So these were some quick tips for you if you were thinking, or if you were on the fence of whether podcast is something that could fit in for your niche. That said, I'll also like to add that if you're really not sure of who exactly would be tuning into your podcast episodes, you might want to wait for a while and decide on what your podcast intends to do and who is it for. That way you'll have more clarity, and you'll not just be creating content for everyone and anyone out there. And yeah, to quickly summarize what you must consider before deciding on whether or not you should start your podcast, we have your time constraints that you must look into. What is the reason that you're starting your podcast, that you must decide upon whether you are, if you're wanting to have a pool of content, maybe having your own podcast will be a good idea. Or if you're wanting to spread the awareness for your brand and build your brand authority, getting started with podcasting would be a good idea. Or if you want to create concrete relationships with your uh, industry experts or your audience, then podcasting will be a good idea. However, if you're confused on who your audience actually is, who would be tuning into your show week on week, then you must wait a while and rethink upon the kind of content you'd be creating, the kind of people it would serve, and who would benefit from it. So that is all for today. I am Manali, and you can follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.